Hello and welcome to Wit, Wisdom, and What Matters Most podcast with your hosts, Danton Troyer and Kyle Luetters. I'm your podcast producer, RJ Malik. Danton and Kyle, good to see you again. Looking forward to your next podcast this is basically number 2 that we're working together. So I'm pretty excited about this. And what are we going to be discussing on this podcast as we move on to your next one?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about, we use the term around here, a family CFO, but
okay.
I think that can mean different things to different people. I know there's probably different firms that also use that. So, what does that mean to us and how do we present ourselves as family CFO?
Okay. So what does that mean to you, Danton? We'll go with you first.
Yeah. And for us, I mean, again, coming from outside of Moneta, I think every advisor out there, no one's out there saying, I don't do tax planning. I don't do comprehensive, financial planning. We all say we do the same thing, but the reality is, and we all know that there are differences. And so, the family CFO to us is a way to encompass really everything. And so when we're working with clients, I mean, someone maybe don't believe us, but, we do a lot for our clients that are maybe outside of, what traditional advisor would say is their scope. So anything that has to do with their financial lives, we truly want to help them with. And we want to understand that. And also, how does that affect everything else? And so the family CFO is simply that is, they are still the CEO of their lives. We are simply the financial officer that's able to help them make good financial decisions so they can run their lives and, focus on, not to steal from the past, what matters most.
Kyle, your take?
To Danton's point, I think every professional that gets into this industry desires and aspires to take care of everything in their clients' financial lives that has a dollar sign. And that's really, to me, what family CFO means. If it has a dollar sign next to it, if that decision involves money, we want to have a say in the table. And that means way more than just investments, insurance. It's workplace benefits, equity compensation. If you still have a mortgage, we pick up the phone and say, hey, look, we know that you've got this interest rate on your mortgage. You should probably refinance, or let's take a look at this. To Danton's point, if you look at an organization, the CEO usually casts vision for the company as a whole. Their purviews over operations, people, finance, so on and so forth. Our CFO role is very similar to that, what you would see in a lot of our clients' businesses. In fact, some of them actually might be CFOs of businesses. But you need a bit of objectivity. And that's what a CFO brings to a CEO is a background knowledge in the numbers, because money at the end of the day is ultimately a tool. And it's how we're going to apply it in a set series of parameters to achieve a goal. So if the client's the CEO, we're the CFO, we're telling you, look, based on the numbers, here we go. What do you want to do? And then we need to figure out a way to get the numbers to align with the vision for the overall thing.
But as CFO for different clients, you have to really know their backgrounds, because you don't have a one size fits all, because that would not work. So what kind of process do you go through to sort of get the lay of the land so you can give them the right plan?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is we just have less relationships at the team level, meaning that, when I started my career, I had 400 families I was working with. Impossible. I mean, you literally couldn't know every single one of them. It's just not, your brain can't handle that. Now we're closer to, 100. You can really get to know 100 families pretty good and really understand what they're trying to accomplish. And so then the money just, hopefully is filling in those holes or, what they're trying to accomplish. But yeah, we need to start with understanding what are you trying to accomplish. And, I've had folks push back. I remember one guy years ago was like, I don't need a financial plan. It's like, it's all garbage anyways. Like, it's never going to happen. And I was like, yeah, you're probably right. Actually, like, none of this today is actually going to happen. But if we don't start with something, you're just aimlessly kind of wandering through life. And, I see that as myself as well. I mean, I didn't expect where I was going to be, 10 years ago to be sitting here doing a podcast, obviously. But the reality is, like, I'm happy I'm here. And if I didn't have a plan of the higher, arching goals that I was trying to accomplish, I wouldn't be doing this. So I think that is, how people focus on, life as well, and why the planning really makes sense.
When that question usually comes my way, I will ask somebody, do you go to the gym? And you'll get a varying level of answer of either yes, no. I said, do you keep yourself going to the gym? Well, usually it's a struggle. Same thing with your finances, by the way. It's a very personal thing like your health. And if you don't have somebody that's coming around with the latest research on how to do this effectively and efficiently, and really someone that's going to help you track your progress and hold you accountable, to Danton's point, you're going to kind of wander aimlessly. You're going to maybe do a deadlift here, get on the Stairmaster there, but you haven't put the complete package together, because if you have a goal of X, the prescribed level of diet and exercise is different than if you have a different one. There are general truths that work in both of these examples, but if you really want to get to the nitty-gritty, if you're really trying to train for a marathon or train for a powerlifting competition, there are core things that are common for both. But I'll be honest with you, I've trained for both. It was completely different, and I needed an expert in each area that was taking a look at the whole picture to get me to where I wanted to go.
It was brought up about how a person would say, well, I don't need a financial planner. I mean, how difficult is it sometimes to talk to people about their money situation? Because that's a personal thing, and it can be quite awkward at times. I mean, hell, between my wife and I, we have some awkward conversations about finances. So now you're dealing with, a client. How do you approach that, Danton?
Yeah, I guess, maybe similar to this podcast, I was a little nervous going through it, but, I've been asking financial questions for 20 years. So for me, like, to talk about finances isn't a big deal, but maybe the problem is that maybe I'm a little too comfortable sometimes. I mean, so, I'll be at a party asking people how much they make, not appropriate, by the way. But, that's just, asking somebody for their social security number. That's what we do all day, every day. So I'm very comfortable having those conversations. So for me, it's secondhand, but I also understand for most people it's not. And so that's what, for me, especially in those meetings, is understanding that I may be making you feel a little bit uncomfortable by asking those difficult questions. But I think sometimes that's a good thing. I mean, if you're not stopping and talking about, those difficult questions, why? I mean, because you can't hide from them forever. I mean, some folks will say, well, I haven't thought about when I'm going to retire. Like, well, at some points that decision is going to get made for you. So let's talk about it and come up with, some ideas of what would work for you. So I think, avoiding those difficult questions isn't the answer either. So we just got to have them.
If somebody says to me, I don't need a financial advisor, I smile and say, that's really cool. Do you have a doctor or a dentist? And some people say, well, I don't need a doctor. I don't need a dentist. I said, what happens if you don't go to the doctor or the dentist for a while? It eventually catches up with you, right? There are things in our lives that we simply do not have the time, talent, or treasure to be experts in. And we offload those services. Full disclosure, I have, with my wife, a financial advisor. I have a one of me for our picture. Why? Because I like shiny things, tools, and barbecue smokers. That gentleman knows what my wife and I's long-term goals are, and he's there to keep us accountable. I have the technical knowledge. It's not so much that for me. It is the accountability of someone saying, hey, Einstein, you and your wife agreed to getting to this point. What your behavior today, short term, is not aligning with the long-term side of things. You can do whatever you want. I don't care. It's not, really my future to have to deal with. But it's just having that person in place that is constantly giving you an objective opinion based on what you said you wanted to do. And we figure out how people or what people want to do very early on in the discovery process. A lot of our first meeting is not, hey, how much do you make? What was your tax refund, or what did you owe last year? Who's this person in your estate planning documents? It's not that. It's tell us what the dream is. Tell us what the big overarching goal is. Tell us if you could wave a magic wand. And I like to use the analogy of a Mona Lisa. If you're over here painting your financial Mona Lisa, what do you want it to look like? And it's going to color in more so as time goes on. But buddy, we got to put the paintbrush on the canvas. We got to start somewhere. So help us understand that. Really, that first meeting is very light on actual numbers and more about dreaming and concepts. And then to Danton's point, we keep track of those things over the course of the years. Every time that we meet with clients, how's your family doing? Have you taken that trip? Grandkids. For a lot of our executive clients now, as they start to get to a certain point in their career, grandkids start to factor in. By the way, you really want to get people to light up, get them talking about their grandkids. And some of them will even tell you if they'd have known how great grandkids were going to be, they would have been nicer to their kids because that's where they got them from. So that's part of what goes into these conversations is it's so much more. It's funny to me that we're in an industry where we talk so much about a certain topic, but it's not the most important thing that we talk about.
Okay, so you're talking like a timeline, and it's been very general, but when does it start to get complex? When does the financial complexity start?
Well, I think it's different for everybody. I mean, certainly, there's no age where you can say, oh, when you're 35, that's the time frame. I mean, and so that's the difficulty as well. Because
it's situations, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, because going back, we were talking about Moderna, some of those guys, I call them kids sometimes. I mean, they were in their 30s when this was happening, and they were, from the emotional side, they were going from a net worth of $2 million, which is amazing at that age. I mean, everybody would love to have that at that age, to sometimes $10 million, but then back down to $2 million. And so to ride that roller coaster at such a young age was certainly transformational. So to say a certain age, but there's just I think once you get to that level at a company where you are starting to receive variable compensation, you've got different benefits packages, and maybe the rank and file employees where you may just have a 401k when you get started, you put some money in, that's pretty simple, but then you add something else. And so I don't know that there's a trigger necessarily, but then it's like, then you've got deferred compensation. You're like, okay, I got this. And then you're like, but then there's restricted stock units. And then, oh, by the way, you're still running like a whole company. So I think it's not like a moment in time, but it just slowly creeps up on people. I think that's maybe the difficulty for us too, in talking with folks is they may start off like, yeah, I got this, it's fine. And then all of a sudden they don't, and they don't even realize it. And so I think that's the difficulty, maybe from our perspective, is trying to convince people they don't always have as good a handle on it maybe as they think.
I like to ask folks, how many pages was your tax return last year? And when you start getting into the 20, 30, 40 page tax return, i.e. it's not like 9 pages or less, you're starting to add enough complexity and schedules and this and that. And that's a cheeky way of asking it, but you've got a lot going on here. Like there's a lot of these pieces, and the tax return, I think, is the perfect analogy because all of those pieces then start to talk together. And if you do something on one end of it, it's going to have a butterfly effect on another end of it, by the way. So if you don't know, objectively, you don't know what you're doing when you sell your restricted stock units, you can't be surprised when there's a negative impact 9 months later, let's say, because now this is all interconnected. Another thing to think about too is that, once you start making 150, 200,000 a year, I know that sounds, depending on where you're looking at, maybe a low or a high threshold. That's where we typically start to find like you're getting into the more complex things, and like the tax code starts to become a little more complex. Your investment selection becomes a little more complex. So taking a look at the tax return, income numbers also one of those, because we've had some clients, to Danton's point, that their wealth overnight just shot. Basically, it was a moonshot, and so how do you handle that? And there's also an emotional complexity to that because, RJ, to your point, this is deeply personal, and our hopes and dreams are tied to this, much like a moon rocket. And if we thought it was this, and now it's this, how do I emotionally process this? We had one client last year, blue collar guy, bricklayer for his entire career, inherits more money than he's ever contemplated out of the blue. What do you do? His entire dynamic for the rest of his life changed financially, literally overnight.
So then you have to coordinate the wealth and their lifestyle. How do you approach that?
Well, every client we would say is different. That feels like a boilerplate answer. At the end of the day, each and every one of us as human beings, I think, have hopes, dreams, and wishes. We all have that idea of what the Mona Lisa is for us. By the way, it changes year over year. There are some folks that we have to, I would say, put the spurs to get them to spend some money in pursuit of that. There's other folks that we have to pull the reins back on from time to time. And at the end of the day, it's constantly encouraging folks on this principle of you get one shot at the turnstile of life. I was talking again this weekend at a men's leadership conference, and on the board, I drew a picture of a tombstone. And in a room full of guys ages 20 through 65, drawing a tombstone, putting start year on one side, end year on the other side, putting a dash in between the two and drawing a circle around it and saying, this is what matters the most, is what you did with this. That's really a good analogy for a lot of our clients too.
Okay. Next question. How does taxes, investments, and legacy planning intersect?
I mean, I think, we've kind of talked about this in general terms, but I mean, every decision you're making there's going to be another reaction on the other side of these things as well. And so I think I think most individuals are very good at figuring out, I need to pay less in taxes. I do X, and then they're done. That's done with, the thinking of finances for the day. But the reality is okay, so you pay less taxes today. What about 20 years from now? How does that planning look for you by continuing to potentially defer taxes? It sounds like a great idea in theory until you think about, okay, well, in retirement, that's what I'm going to pay on these taxes. And oh, by the way, too, my kids, my legacy, they may be paying even more in taxes. And so, all these different things are going to be interrelated. And if I even as an individual, and Kyle said he has his own financial planner, I mean, it's because there's so many different things that just are intersecting in any given decision. And just as individuals, we're very poor at thinking beyond, the day, most days. I mean, especially, if you are an executive level, I mean, you've got 100 other decisions that are very, very important. To think how much you're going to defer in your 401k in any just given day, it's not that important. And you're probably right. That day, it's not that important. But if you don't look at it for 20 years, it became really important for you. So I think that's the difficulty with all of this is, one decision in and of itself, you're right, it's probably not that big of a deal. But if you continually make these decisions or don't make these decisions, it can have a serious impact, not only on your life, but your kids' lives as well. And I think that's what people don't really underestimate.
The concept of stacking bricks really comes into play. So if you've ever built a retaining wall or anything like that around your house, if you lay the first row and you think, that looks okay, you're not going to find out that it wasn't done right or you omitted something until you get 6, 7, maybe 8 bricks high. And to Danton's point, that's where we see a lot of things kind of come to roost. And then you got to figure out how to correct the very bottom, the most load-bearing row of this thing from the top. And sometimes you just can't do it. Within the scope of the rules, or in this case, the laws of physics, if we're talking about the brick wall. That's why each and every one of these things has to be taken together and considered, because to Danton's point, there are some folks that we tell them today, look, you should do a Roth conversion and pay taxes today. Why? I wanted a big refund. No, because you're probably going to keep making more money. You're probably going to always be in a high tax bracket. Let's just go ahead and pay the tax today and get it over with and get Uncle Sam out of your life in this regard. Because we know that you're going to leave enough to your kids that you don't want to create a multi-generational tax problem for them later on. That's where all of this stuff comes into play. And in investments with asset location, depending on what the tax code is and what we want to inherit, we put different things in different places. The leverage layperson just is not getting into that level of detail.
Well, I mean, in their defense, they've got a career. Mm-hmm. So they're focused on doing the best in their career. And this other part, and this is why you guys have your jobs, it is It's difficult and it's complex as you're talking about. So how do you get a person to, like myself? Let's just say myself. I worked in radio my entire career, and that's what I was focused on: radio, 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 and just getting to the next station, next level, next market, whatever. How do you shift a person's mindset who is so focused on their career to start looking at the future? How do you shift that mindset?
I think it kind of depends on, obviously the person, but, really where they are in their career as well. I mean, most people, even, the executives just love their job, love what they're doing, also realize at some point they got to stop. Now, that's a whole nother conversation of how difficult that can be. But I think at some point they start to realize that as well. And that's when you really, I mean, everybody, I think, is going to have some sort of, hopes and goals and dreams. And so if you start there, they can really articulate that. But then how they're going to get there, especially financially, becomes a little more difficult, a little more foggy. So if you just start with the easy questions, and then start asking a little bit more about the details, the foggier it gets, the more they start to realize, like, oh yeah, like I there are some questions I probably haven't thought about. I really should be thinking in this way. For most people, I feel like that's kind of the revelation that comes through it. So, I mean, I was talking to a prospect the other day, and yeah, I mean, we had 2 meetings, and after the end of the meeting, he was like, I haven't thought this much about that, like, ever. And I was like, we've spent 2 hours together, and I was like, yeah, I mean, it's just really just asking questions, and I don't have all the answers to all these questions for you right now, but together we're going to figure it out. And I think that's the peace of mind, and I think that's kind of gets what people starting at least to have that conversation, even if they've worked with an advisor in the past. Just starting to have those conversations, it really is meaningful.
I was having a conversation 2 to 3 weeks ago with a young family. Both of them are dentists. They're pregnant with their 3rd child. And the impetus for the meeting, I always like to start meetings, especially if someone's been referred. So what warranted you to reach out at this point in time? And the husband and wife looked at each other and they said, we are getting so much stuff in the mail that we don't know anything about it, what it means. And there's a lot of numbers, and now there's some big numbers on it, that we just self-realized we need help. And for a lot of people, I think there's an inflection moment, especially when you consider starting a family, starting careers. Then you get deeper into those, that you get deeper into the family life and deeper into the careers. The workload becomes a lot more. There's just so much coming at you, and that's where you can talk and have conversations with folks, but until they have that self-realization, the conversation's really not that open. We don't sell anything. I would say we don't sell anything. We are here as guides. And what's that old adage? When the student is ready, the master will appear. By the way, I cannot tell you that we are masters. I think that is not the right verbiage there. But we're the people that says, look, I'm going to help you figure out the path out of here. I'm going to help light the torches for the path on out of this that you're feeling right now. And we're going to do it together. And more oftentimes than not, people just want to go with a trusted guide, someone that's been there before. Think about if you went on vacation somewhere. Let's say you're going to Disney World. You find out that somebody that you know, or maybe you don't know, has been there before. You pepper them with questions. I'm curious. How did you do this? What was it like? I think innately as humans, we're always curious about that. And that's really what we do with folks, is we're just a trusted guide.
Interesting. All right, gentlemen, we're coming to the end. Is there anything that you want to share that you haven't covered yet?
Personally, for me, getting to come to Minetta was the manifestation of getting to do financial planning the way that I really thought it should be done. I've been at firms in the past where if you were caught with a client's tax return, it was basically contraband. It was like having smuggled goods, so to speak. And now I can't imagine not having certain elements of what we do from a planning standpoint. And one time, a lady that I was prospecting said, look, tell me how you're different. I feel like I could sling a bag of dead cats and hit 9 of you financial planners. Like, what makes you guys different? To me, it's the family CFO approach. It's the holistic aspect of it. Holistics may be overused, but literally everything with a dollar sign we've got eyes on, and we're helping coordinate to see how it impacts the entire plan. So someone asks how we're different. I would put our process and what we gather and what we know up against about anybody else. And that's a big reason why I stay here, is because of the way that we do these things. And that's what makes it different.
Yeah. I mean, I'd echo that maybe with a story. I flew out to go see a client in the San Francisco area. And I was like, what do you guys want to do? I want to see the area. I've been here, but not, with you. And so they took us on a hike. They're very into nature. And so they took us through a redwood forest, and it was a beautiful hike. But at the end, he's like, why are you here? And I was kind of taken back. I was like, well, I don't know. I just wanted to meet you. I met them, through a referral, and I never met them before. And we had great conversations on this walk. And at the end, they were just like blown away that we would take the time to take a hike as our financial advisors in the redwood forest. But through that hike, I learned all their preferences. I learned, what makes them tick. So if I would have come to them with, just boilerplate investment recommendations, they would look at me like I had three heads. They had a different perspective on life than I did, for example, or the next client is. And without that little it's maybe an hour hike through the woods, I wouldn't have known all these things. So you get on these Zoom calls and, it seems rushed, but, just taking time to just listen to what's important to them, it changed everything. And the way I deal with them is completely different than the next client just because of that.
All right. Great. And again, enjoyed talking with both of you. Contact information. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, the easiest way is through our website, witwisdomandwhatmattersmost.com. That'll lead you back to our page. And obviously, you want to connect with us professionally, you can find us there as well, or listen to some of the other episodes we have out there.
Excellent. All right. Danton and Kyle, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Looking forward to your next podcast. And thank you for listening to today's Wit, Wisdom, and What Matters Most podcast. Please like, follow, and share this podcast with friends and family. Until our next Wit, Wisdom, and What Matters Most podcast, I'm RJ Malik.
Thank you for listening to the Wit, Wisdom, and What Matters Most podcast. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at witwisdomandwhatmattersmost.com to learn more and find additional ways to connect with us in the show notes. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional before making a decision. Investment advisory services offered by Moneta Group Investment Advisors, LLC, an investment advisor registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Registration does not imply a certain level of skill or training. The information discussed in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and represents the views and opinions of the guest and/or host and does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Moneta. You should consult with an appropriately credentialed professional before making any financial, investment, tax, or legal decision. Past performance is not indicative of future returns. All investments are subject to risk of loss. Please see disclosure for additional information.